Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to focus on a concern that many companies in my state have problems with. They believe it's hindering their goal to meet the needs of their customers, and that's the QRA. They're concerned about the formula, which we've talked about, and also about the unpredictability of the year-to-year caps. And Mr. Strode, I'd like to ask you some questions on that. With your experience, how do you believe that these QRA caps are affecting the companies that you represent? And I'd like you to talk about the planning process and the problems that some of these companies may have in even forming a business plan because of that unpredictability. And you mentioned, I think, earlier in your testimony about a 5-year plan, and is that required?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, the FCC requires from us a 5-year plan starting this year on July 1st. By July 1st, we have to submit a 5-year plan of how we're going to make broadband available in areas where it's not available now, or increase bandwidth in areas where it is available today. So it's investment in broadband services. We are required to make that plan, provide some other information in terms of unfulfilled requests, if there are any, for broadband services, and submit that plan by July 1st, describing how we're using universal service funds that we receive. A year from now, or in July of 2014, we're going to have to submit another 5-year plan, update, prospective 5-year plan, and report on the progress that we've made on the 5-year plan that we presented the year before. In a environment in which we don't know, are unable to accurately predict what our recovery is going to be on investments that we make, because the QRA, the regression analysis, we don't know what companies are in the same group with us. We don't know how we're investing in comparison to them. We don't know if we're making investments that are going to push us over the 90th percentile or not. It's very difficult to make plans to know that this investment is going to what recovery, what revenues we will receive from the Universal Service Fund on that investment. And so it makes it difficult to look into the future for 5 years and make plans not knowing what's next in terms of recovery. And as I said, the Commission is still considering further caps and cuts in the fund, and we don't know what impacts those will have. So trying to make a 5-year plan is extremely difficult.
I have a company in my state that in their plan, I believe it is, that they need $1 million for investment, and they received, I think, $125,000. How would you suggest a company can plan unless we change it? Should the Commission be looking at maybe at regions instead of the entire country with regards to the formula? To look, instead of having such diverse companies involved in trying to divvy out the money that way, should you look more for companies that are alike, at least in the regions that they serve?
My understanding is that the companies that are in the sample, or they're in the regression analysis with our companies, are companies that are similarly situated, have similar terrain, similar customer densities. My recommendation is that the FCC use the regression analysis not as a hard cut at 90th percentile, but use that as a method to identify companies that need further investigation. Rather than saying, because you're above the 90th percentile, we're going to limit you, look at the companies that are above the 90th percentile and say, okay, why is it expensive to serve in that area? Show us what you've done, justify these costs to us, and if a company can't justify the costs, then limit their receipts. But if the company is spending that money in a good faith effort to provide broadband to customers in its service territory who aren't going to get it otherwise in many cases, then they shouldn't be penalized simply because the area where they serve is very expensive to serve in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of questions I wanted to follow up on since we have a few minutes left. Mr. Davis, when Senator Wicker and I think Senator Blunt also was asking you about the CAF 1 question, and the money that was accepted, I think it was $115 million, is that correct? And that was out of about $300 million?
That's correct.
Can you tell me how many carriers accepted the money?
I don't know the actual number. We can provide that for you, though.
Okay. And do you know how many were turned down? Were there any?
It was not as much turned down as the commitment would be to build to a certain number of households for every $775 received. And so I don't believe any were per se turned down. Proposals that companies made to provide different benchmarks were turned down.
By the companies that didn't receive the money, correct?
By companies who had the option to receive the money but could not make $775 work for their rural constituents.
They didn't reach the benchmarks that were set. Were those benchmarks realistic?
The benchmark, as it turns out, was not realistic for most rural customers, and so it was set too low to serve the vast majority of rural unserved customers.
Have you or any of the other companies given suggestions on how those benchmarks might be changed?
We have. We've had extensive discussions with the FCC about creating new benchmarks that allows us to put this money to use. It's just sitting on the sidelines, and we are hopeful. And members of this committee and the Congress have weighed in and said, let's get this money and put it to use and build broadband in unserved parts of America. And we're hopeful that the FCC is moving that direction.
Okay, thank you. And then, Mr. Strode, a follow-up question for you. You outlined 3 steps that the FCC should take to uphold the legal requirement that the fund should support sufficient that fund support should be sufficient, predictable, and specific. So what are the steps that you think need to be phased in for the caps over a longer period of time in order to meet those?
Well, the QRA analysis, the regression analysis should be clarified and used, as I said earlier, as a tool rather than, it should be used as a tool to identify areas that need further examination. The FCC should not implement any new changes until they evaluate the changes that have been made and see what impact they've had, see if they've helped. The FCC needs to also define us a clear path, a plan for broadband for rural areas that is understandable and achievable, and that I guess gives rural people in rural areas a realistic opportunity to receive broadband services that work, that are comparable, reasonably comparable to what's available in our urban areas.
Right, but do you believe that the FCC should phase in those caps over a certain amount of time, and what kind of timeline would you give them?
I don't agree that the caps are necessarily appropriate. Like I said, there are legitimate reasons that companies' costs are high, and while I understand that the FCC has set a budget and is trying to work with that budget, I think they've got the regulatory cart before the horse. They set a budget before they knew what the real cost to provide broadband to people in rural areas is. I don't agree that caps are necessary or that they're even useful if they prevent people in rural areas from getting broadband services.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.